Hello, my name is Kevin Macbeth. I'm here to do my final presentation for CS479. And my project really is the Healthy Food Link application, a project designed to bring community-supported agriculture financed by the government to provide healthy, sustainably grown food to people who otherwise would not have access to it because of location or socioeconomic status. So to define the problem, there's really two ways of looking at the problem we're trying to solve. In trying to provide food to healthy people, we're trying to break something that historically I refer to it as the socioeconomic reinforcement problem, where you have conditions that a child experiences might be passed on to their child. So a good example is how poor nutrition and lack of education leads to a person growing up, developing, having a child, and then that child also having poor nutrition and education as they stayed in the same socioeconomic status. Additionally, the problem is geographic in the sense that in my home state of Colorado, a lot of food is imported because Colorado is literally a desert. So they have this term called urban deserts, but Colorado is both climatically a desert where food prices are just more expensive because they have to be imported. So for people in locations such as the cities that might not have as much wealth, a good example is Commerce City, which is like the urban sector of Denver, where they have a lot of factories. It might not be realistic for either the market to support healthy organic food like it would in the suburbs. So this project really assists in trying to bring food to the people who either live in an area where the market doesn't support it or who can't afford it, which is both a problem from a socioeconomic status point of view and also a geographic point of view, whether or not you live in a city or a desert. So our proposed solution is to provide healthy, locally sourced food to people who wouldn't have access to it. So how we're going to do this from a computation point of view is to actually develop an application which has a link algorithm that kind of matches. It matches people who qualify for the program, registering their interests to what is available in our grower marketplace. So the growers kind of upload what they have available or what they're planning on growing, when they're going to release it. And then the algorithm tries to get to the people who most qualify their preferential choices of what is healthy and nutritious. Additionally, this project includes delivery to make it pretty much a bigger picture project where we can control the entire life cycle of things from farm to table. This also aids in providing jobs that are non-technical, which is important for local governments especially in the face of automation. So it provides a method of employment. Additionally, as I mentioned before, this program will be financed by the government and it'll be marketed as a social benefit. So we're looking at securing government funding through laws and convincing the taxpayers that this is a good usage of resources. So speaking of resources, we're ideally going to sponsor this program not as a nonprofit, but as something funded by the government. So for an initial pilot, we're looking at trying to implement this in, say, a city like Denver, which has a large population. There are a lot of farms around, a lot of growers who might be interested. Additionally, we're planning on paying the growers for the food. So that cost isn't really reflected here. But that's a way of kind of supporting community agriculture through taxpayer money while providing that benefit to individuals who are most in need of it. So we estimated some costs, and most of this is actually the delivery section. But up front, it would cost $280,000 to develop the application and secure the trucks necessary. And then we have an estimated yearly cost of about $220,000 per year for any necessary maintenance staff of both the application, the servers, and the delivery vehicles, along with the delivery drivers themselves. So this, again, is not including the food sourcing, which is extended cost. This is more of the infrastructure cost. So in terms of personnel, it requires an application developer, senior and a junior, because the idea is we're trying to give experience to somebody. So we want kind of more to use this application as a way to teach. So we have a senior developer responsible for everything, and then having kind of an understudy to help with low-level code. Additionally, we have administrative employees who are responsible for updating information. And we have server maintenance employees that are more part-time that kind of just make sure the servers are running correctly. We're planning on using AWS, so that takes into account a lot of it. And the cost of those servers is actually pretty cheap and scalable. And finally, the last personnel we require is delivery driver or drivers. So depending on scale of adoption, those yearly costs might go up. But the delivery driver is one of the biggest expenses. In addition, we'll need the actual trucks to provide maintenance for them. So these all exist in a pretty ample supply. The hardest people to kind of get are a part-time server maintenance person and an administrative employee. But the idea is to shift that responsibility to the government that's financing the project. So when we look at stakeholders, we group this into major and minor state groups. The major stakeholders are the public and farmers. So the public really is two separate groups. The people actually paying taxes, who we want to be transparent and ensure we're good custodians and allocators of their money that they're paying, that they worked hard to earn and are giving to the government to support this project. Additionally, we're also a customer-facing project where we interface a lot with customers and provide them services. So we have to encourage trust in those customers to make sure that they want to use our application and they think that they're treated fairly and equally, as one of our goals of our project is to do. Additionally, we require the farmers who are actually supplying the resources. So like I said before, the plan is to compensate them in a sort of community-supported agriculture form to promote sustainability of food growing. So this is one way of making it easier to appease these stakeholders by actually reimbursing them and financially supporting them for agreeing to take part in this project. So we also have some minor stakeholders, which are the corporations. So these are for entities that deal in the businesses of food and agriculture and actual food delivery, which would be kind of like a grocery store. The idea is we have to encourage that we have to appeal to them to not stop this bill or to not allocate resources to fight it, and maybe it'd be preferential to have them support it. But one of our issues is to make sure that they don't have too much influence in our project so it doesn't lose sight of its intended goal. So we have many responsibilities to uphold, grouping them into legal, social, and ethical constraints. Legally, we have both regulatory agencies for our own portions of the project, and we have regulatory agencies for who we source the food from, so farmers. So we're looking at some similar players in the Occupational Safety and Hazardous Administration, the Food and Drug Administration, the Department of Agriculture, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So we have to be very mindful to be in compliance with these government regulations and to have their sign-offs. Additionally, we have social considerations because this is a customer-facing, public-facing project which is funded by the public. So we're obligated to spend money fairly or responsibly, be good custodians and allocators of resources while ensuring fairness and equality of the food that we have to make sure it's being distributed to the people it's supposed to be being distributed to with no considerations for any identifying features such as race or gender. Additionally, we have ethical responsibilities. I think the two major ones that we haven't touched on before, I think a lot of these are just ethical, like the social constraints. But these would be ensuring that food quality. I think that's one of the most dependent, that's the purpose of the project, and I think it's one of the things that ethically we have to maintain throughout to make sure we're not sacrificing standards and actually making things worse for people. And additionally, we would like to separate corporate interests from the project so it's not used as a vessel to actually increase profits for a company. So in terms of feasibility, I mentioned the cost before. It is quite expensive. From a computation point of view, it's very doable. The most complicated thing is the linking algorithm, which needs to be tested to make sure it's fair and meets its intended purpose. But in terms of computation, the resources are actually a very small portion of the project, except for the development effort of the application, the web application. So from a computation point of view, this is something that's been done for many years. From a funding point of view, it's more unlikely than the computation to get this funding. It will cost in excess of $500,000 in the first 2 years and around $250,000 each year after. And it requires government and taxpayer approval, which is a very lengthy process with many hurdles to overcome. But we do have a selling point here. We'll talk about this later, but some of the benefits are it does provide jobs. So some of that money is going to individuals to help support non-technical jobs that are disappearing with automation. So implementation. Right now, this project is in the initial stage. We have a business plan. I think the next step would be to redraft it to make it more pitch ready. along with building a prototype to demonstrate for that government pitch. And then the idea is once we pitch, we'd like to secure government funding for a pilot program, launch it, so we can evaluate some metrics. So we'll talk about metrics later. And then potentially once, depending on the results of those metrics, we can discuss extending the project, canceling the project, amending the project, whatever we need to do to make it a good usage of money. And finally, there's just general maintenance of the project, just maintenance of the servers, and then the delivery function, which is much more intensive and complicated. So there are consequences, as always. There's some obligations we need to meet. So the way I'll talk about this, I'll just introduce the negative first. It is an expensive project. It has a substantial cost to taxpayers, and this money could be used for a lot of different things. I think this project is a good usage of money because it helps break that socioeconomic reinforcement cycle. So I think it's a very worthwhile thing to pursue. But we do need to ensure that value is derived and being able to demonstrate and be transparent to the people paying for the project that it is actually going to a good use instead of some nefarious purpose. Additionally, because it's dealing with agriculture and food in terms of how we source things, we have a potential impact to the environment that we need to be very mindful of. We're driving vehicles, causing pollution potentially. So it's important to be careful about how we source our food that we're delivering, and additionally the types of vehicles we use and how we operate them. So obligations, I've touched upon these a lot during this presentation, but we're obligated to be transparent to the public. We're responsible to use the money fairly or responsibly and not waste it on non-productive activities while ensuring fairness and equality to the people who are receiving this benefit. Finally, there's a non-competition obligation we have with the agriculture, food, and grocery delivery organizations, to where one of the things we're going to tell them when we try to prevent them from fighting this is that, hey, we're not actually competing in the same markets as you. This won't impact your bottom line. So we have an obligation to maintain that promise. And finally, as mentioned before, one of the biggest issues is food quality. Ensuring that the food we get is actually better than what people currently have access to in those lower socioeconomic ladders. There are many positive consequences. I think the first one is the purpose of the application, in that we're trying to provide healthier food to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it, to break that socioeconomic reinforcement cycle and encourage better outcomes for people who are disadvantaged. Additionally, this project will create jobs that are non-technical. I think the non-technical specification is very important with automation. The application jobs, the development jobs are growing in demand, but what is not in demand is non-technical jobs for people who don't have that intense education. So I think that's a very good outcome because it's a government program which actually most of the money goes back into constituents of that government. And finally, this is an opportunity to have community supported agriculture on a bigger scale. So using this project, we can encourage sustainable usage of land and help improve environmental conditions down the long run, while supporting small farmers who are also taxpayers. So I think these are all benefits to the project, but we do have to make sure that these outweigh the costs. So finally, one of the most important things that I've learned during this course is that we need to measure our project success, and it's all the more important because this is a government-funded project. So there are two main ways of measuring success. There's kind of a qualitative improvement of like, hey, we're improving people's quality of food by this much. I think once we can do that, we can really evaluate the impact better. So an impact number would be like number of people served. But I think our main metric is once we get that quality improvement, the idea is to use a Likert scale, which is an ordinal, like worst to best, and do like a rating comparison between what people participating in the program currently have and what they're likely to have, and then measuring exactly how much of dietary replacement they have. We can measure impact in terms of how the quality with which we're providing with the money that we have. So we have that cost side on the left, and then we have this output, which is this metric. So I think it's important to look at this during the pilot. There's trade-offs. If we spend a lot, we could probably increase it a lot, but it might not be worth it. Additionally, another thing we have to evaluate when we evaluate impact is getting the global number of individuals affected. So in conclusion, I'm introducing the Healthy Food Link project. The idea is to provide food to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. We've talked about many benefits, including breaking that socioeconomic reinforcement cycle, the jobs we're going to create, and finally the community-supported agriculture aspect of it. Another form of job creation and supporting small businesses for people who aren't necessarily college educated. But it does come at some cost. The idea is to get this cost approved through the government through some legal actions, which I think would benefit the government overall, the public. There are longer term effects we're also looking at, such as impact on healthcare costs down the line and potential savings with emergency savings. But those are so long term, we have to really look at the pilot program that we established to establish that quality improvement and evaluate it versus the costs. So thank you for taking the time to listen. I'll open the floor to any questions. Feel free to post. Thank you. Bye.